Welcome back to 3 Inquisitive Kids. Today we're going to be learning about the absolute value. The learning goals is to understand the concept of the additive inverses and to be able to find the additive inverse of a number. Getting a preliminary understanding of the meaning of absolute value. Mastering absolute value of rational numbers, the method to realize the thinking of combining number and shape. To use the absolute value to compare the magnitude of two negative numbers. Please observe these two numbers. What are the similarities and differences between them? Can you list two such numbers? First, they have the same numbers, but they have different signs in front of them. These are examples of having the same numbers, but the two numbers have different symbols in front of them. If two numbers has only different symbols, then both numbers are each other's additive inverse. We call these two numbers additive inverses. In particular, the additive inverse of 0 is 0. Okay, now I have to answer these questions if they're correct or incorrect. Negative 10 is 10's additive inverse. This is correct because they both have the number 10, but it's just the sign in front of them that's different. 10 is 10's additive inverse. This is wrong because they don't have different signs. 1.5 and negative 5 are additive inverses. This is correct because they both have 1.5 and one has nothing in front of it. One is positive and one is negative. And negative 2 is an additive inverse. This is wrong. Observe the scene of two dogs looking for food in the picture below. Show the scene on the number line and answer the questions. Okay, so the dogs are going off to find their bones, and then they started from the tree. And from the tree, the white dog went 3 meters to the west, and the yellow dog went 3 meters in the opposite direction, which the east. The tree is 0. And then the white dog is on negative 3 on the number 9, which is A on dot A. The yellow dog is on positive 3, so on dot B. Do they follow the same routes? Are the same distance, length of line segments OA and OB? So what's it asking if they took the same route, and they didn't, because the white dog went the opposite direction of the yellow dog. It's asking if AO is the same distance as OB. AO is the same length as OB because they're both 3 away from 0. They have different roots, but positive and negative in the number line. And then the same distance, equal distance to the origin, regardless of direction. The origin in here is 0. The absolute value is the distance of a point to the origin. So here is 0. And 0 to 4 is 4. The distance from 4 to the origin is 4. So the absolute value of 4 is 4. Recorded as the absolute value of 4. It has 4 and 2 lines on either side of it. The distance from negative 5 to the origin is 5. So the absolute value of negative 5 is 5. Recorded as the negative 5 with 2 straight lines on either side of it. The distance from 0 to the origin is 0, so the absolute value of 0 is 0, recorded as 0 with the 2 lines on either side of it. The distance between positive 7 and the origin is 7 unit lengths, and the absolute value of 7 is also 7, recorded as this. The distance between the point of 2.8 and the origin is 2.8 units of length. That is, the absolute value of 2.8 is 2.8, written as 2.8 with the lines on the side. The distance between the point 0 and the origin is 0 unit lengths. That is, the absolute value of 0 is 0, written like this. The distance between the point of positive 6 and the origin is 6 unit lengths. That is, the absolute value of 6 is 6, which is written as this. If A represents a rational number, what does the absolute of A mean? It means the absolute value of A represents the distance between the point corresponding to the number A on the number axis in the origin. How do you express the opposite of A? What is the relationship of both the absolute values? So the answer for the first question is using additive inverses. The additive inverse of one number is the opposite of that number. And the relationship of both the absolute values is that the absolute value of both the numbers is the same. If the absolute value of A is equal to the absolute value of B, then what is the relationship between A and B? E has to equal B, or A has to equal negative B. Find the absolute value of the following numbers. The absolute value of 21 is negative 21. The absolute value of negative 21 is 21. The absolute value of 4 over 9 is 4 over 9. The absolute value of 0 is 0. The absolute value of negative 7.8 is 7.8. Write the absolute value of the following numbers. So, the absolute value of 6 is 6. The absolute value of negative 8 is 8. Negative 3.9. Absolute value is 3.9. And the absolute value of 5 over 2 is 5 over 2. And negative 2 over 11's absolute value is 2 over 11. 100's absolute value is 100. 0's absolute value is 0. What does the absolute value of a number have to do with its number? The absolute value of a positive number is itself. And the absolute value of a negative number is its additive inverse. The distance from the origin to the origin is 0. The absolute value of 0 is 0. That is, the absolute value of 0 is 0. Because positive numbers can be represented by A is greater than 0, and negative numbers can be represented by A is smaller than 0. How can the examples on slide 15 be represented? A is larger or equal to 0, and if A is bigger than 0, then the absolute value of A is equal to A. If A is smaller than 0, then the absolute value of A is equal to negative A. Because if A is a negative number, if you minus a negative number, it's going to be equal to adding that negative number. So if A is a negative number and there's a negative sign in front of that, then it's positive. If A is equal to 0, then A is just equal to 0. How many numbers have an absolute value of 7? What are the numbers? Two numbers have the absolute value of 7, negative 7 and 7. Because there's no number whose absolute value is equal to negative 2. Because all absolute values are positive. Or it is a 0. How many numbers have an absolute value of 0? What is each number? Exactly one number has an absolute value of 0, and that is 0. How many integers have an absolute value less than 3? There are 5 integers whose absolute value is less than 3. Negative 2, negative 1, 0, 1, and 2. Plot the following numbers on a number line and compare their sizes. Okay, so let's plot them. So negative 5 is here. So we find Negative 5 is less than negative 3, which is less than negative 1.5, which is less than negative 1. Find the absolute value of each number in the question number 1 and compare their sizes. Negative 1.5, and then compare it to its absolute value, which is 1.5. And then, and then negative 3's absolute value is 3, and negative 1's absolute value is 1, and negative 5's absolute value is 5. What do you notice in question 1 and question 2? 1 is smaller than 1.5, which is smaller than 3, which is smaller than 5. If we compare the magnitude of two negative numbers, the greater absolute value is the smaller than is the number. So, negative 3 and negative 5, negative 3 is bigger than negative 5, right? But if you take the absolute values, the smaller the number is, like negative 5 is smaller than negative 3, the greater the absolute value is, which means 5 is greater than 3. Compare the sides of each group below. Negative 1, negative 5. So, negative 1, you can turn it, its absolute value is 1. Negative 5's absolute value is 5, which means that negative 5 is the smaller. And negative 5 over 6 and negative 2.7. Okay? And then we can get their absolute values, which is 5 over 6 and 2.7, and we see that 2.7 is bigger than 5 over 6, which means that negative 2.7 is smaller than negative 5 over 6. How can you compare? Number 1. Because negative 5 is to the left of negative 1, so negative 5 is smaller than negative 1. 2. Because negative 2.7 is to the left of negative 5 over 6, so negative 2.7 is smaller than negative 5 over 6. Given that x's absolute value is equal to 2, and the absolute value of y is equal to 3, and x is smaller than y, find x and y. From the definition of the absolute value, x has to be equal to positive or negative 2, and y has to be positive negative 3. And then x is smaller than y determines the values of x and y. Because the absolute value of x is equal to 2, and absolute value of y is equal to 3, then x will equal to positive or negative 2, and y will equal to positive or negative 3. Because x is smaller than y, x will have to be 2, and y will have to be 3. Or x is negative 2, or y is 3. Given that x minus 4's absolute value plus y minus 3's absolute value, find the value of x and y. So we have to make the things inside the absolute values have to be equal to 0, or else the sum won't be 0. For x to minus 4 to be equal to 0, x has to be 4. And for y minus 3 to be equal to 0, y has to be 3. And 4 plus 3 is 7. The absolute value is always greater than or equal to 0. That is a non-negative number. If the sum of two non-negative numbers is equal to 0, the two numbers are 0 at the same time. According to the meaning of the question, x minus 4 has to be 0. And y minus 3 has to be 0. So x equals 4 and y equals 3. Therefore, x plus y is equal to 7. The sum of several non-negative numbers is 0. Then these numbers Okay, class summary is that absolute value has additive inverses nature of absolute value in comparing the magnitude of negative numbers. The additive inverses is the 2 points on the number line that is opposite to each other are located on both sides of the origin and are at the same distance from the origin. The nature of absolute value is that the absolute value of A has to be A, either A has to be bigger than 0 or A has to be equal to 0. The larger the absolute value is, the smaller is the number. Here is what we learned in this class. Additive inverses are numbers whose absolute value is the same, while on the different sides of the origin. For instance, -7 and +7. Absolute value is always bigger or equal to 0. The distance between a number and the origin, represented by 2 lines. The negative number, which with the larger absolute value, has the smallest value.